Hello, TOK students. In this video, we're going to try to give you the big picture of what the TOK class is all about. And at the center of the TOK class is going to be the TOK diagram that we're going to constantly rely on. And I'm referring to this big diagram here on the left of the screen. TOK is traditionally divided up into two broad categories. That is, the ways of knowing, as represented by the red portion of this diagram, and the areas of knowledge, as shown on the outside of the diagram, mostly in blue. But before we get to the diagram, I want to take even a step further back, take a broader step out for just a moment. What TOK is, in a large scale, all about are really two ideas. The ideas of knowledge claims and knowledge questions. Now, it turns out you have a fair amount of experience with knowledge claims. This is basically the stuff you learn about in school, in your economics class, your literature class, your science classes. All of these different classes are making particular knowledge claims. The content of these classes are what we believe to be the best understanding of science, the best understanding of economics, the best understanding of history that we have. And so those are a series of knowledge claims. So you're used to studying knowledge claims. You're used to preparing for the assessment that might ask questions about those knowledge claims. So you guys will be pretty good when we talk about what is it that we think that we know. But the other part of TOK is about knowledge questions. And that is questions that are about the nature of knowledge itself. For example, here are some questions. What do we know could count as evidence for a particular claim? Scientists, for example, they gather evidence, and they think that this helps them substantiate maybe some hypothesis that they have. What makes a good explanation in a particular area of knowledge? What might make a good explanation for perhaps the motivation of a character in a story? What are the implications of the knowledge that we have? If we claim that we know something and that we have good evidence to know that thing, what are the implications of knowing that thing, and how might it be connected to other areas of knowledge? How do we know whether it is right to do something? Talking about ethics, what kind of evidence do we need to have to be able to say that something is ethically right or ethically wrong? So instead of just making questions about what do you know and assessing those like you have done in traditional classes, in TOK we're going to take a step back. How is it that you know what you claim to know? That's going to be one of the fundamental knowledge questions that we're going to be addressing throughout the course. So let's go back to the diagram here. Now the diagram has three layers. In the center are knowers or a knower. Now that's you. That's you and me. That's the class. That's the community of learners that is attempting to understand something about the broader world. So you and your colleagues and your teachers, we are always at the center of the TOK class. Ultimately, there sort of can't be any knowledge unless there's somebody there to know about it. And that's why the knower or knowers is always going to be at the center of this diagram. The next layer out are the ways of knowing. Now, over the years, the IBO has actually made some adjustments to what counts as a way of knowing. It used to be that there were sort of four ways of knowing: emotion, language, reason, and sense perception. Over the years that schools have been teaching this course, they've realized that, students and knowers in general claim that they know things through ways that go beyond those four traditional ways of knowing. And so, more recently, the IBO has begun to include ideas about memory. Right? Clearly, memory has a role to play in what it is that we know. What do you know about your younger childhood? Imagination. Think about classic thought experiments that have been done by scientists and philosophers. They don't actually go in and do an experiment, but they imagine what might happen given certain circumstances. So the imagination can play a role in developing knowledge. Surely artists rely on their imagination. Intuition. Sometimes when you get a hunch about something, that's your intuition. And that seems to be, in many cases, a reliable way to try to know something. Faith. So we could be talking here about religious faith. Many folks claim that they can understand the world better through some sort of conception of faith. So the ways of knowing have expanded to include these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ways of knowing. One that I'll end up with here is sense perception. Now, sometimes in TOK, that gets shortened to just perception, which is sort of a mistake, because then people think that you're talking about things like opinions and beliefs. That is not what sense perception is referring to. Sense perception is referring to really the biological and psychological process of taking in information from the surrounding world. Your sense of sight, your sense of hearing, your sense of touch. All of that is one way that we take in, are all the different ways we take in information, and then we begin to process that. So that's what we mean by sense perception. So with you at the center, or with us at the center, we engage in the world with all of these different ways of knowing. And then, since we're talking about knowledge here, what is it that we can attempt to know? And that gets us to the areas of knowledge on the outside of the circle. Now again, the IBO has expanded areas of knowledge over the last few years. It used to be that the main areas of knowledge were ethics, history, mathematics, arts, the natural sciences. So this would refer to things like physics and chemistry and biology, the sciences we use to study the natural world. Human sciences. These would be things like social science or economics. And then recently the IBO has added a couple of additional areas of knowledge. Religious knowledge systems, which surely goes along with the addition of the way of knowing of faith, and then indigenous knowledge systems. So there are things that various peoples of the world know and know how to do, and those know-hows seem to be inherent, indigenous to particular groups of people. And so that's our TOK diagram. Starting from the outside, the areas of knowledge. And these are the things that you folks have been studying in class for the last, 12, 13 years of your life when you've been in school. But what we want to investigate in TOK is how these areas of knowledge, the stuff that you're learning in class, how are they connected to these ways of knowing? And there are times when the claims that we make about the areas of knowledge may not be as valid, as sound, as we think they might be. And oftentimes that might be a knowledge issue with something associated with a way of knowing. There was a philosopher whose last name was Wittgenstein who once said that all problems of philosophy have to do with problems of language. That's an interesting idea to begin to think about, because when you think about how it is that you know things, you're able to know things because of language. You're able to articulate that you know things because of language. But there are limitations to language, and that's an example of the kind of knowledge question we might engage in. What are the limitations of language? What is the power of language, to put it in a more positive sense, that allows us to gain access to these areas of knowledge? That's just one type of conversation that we're going to have in the class. And I want to finish this video with a quote, and I believe it comes from a Chinese proverb, and the quote essentially says this: "Teachers can open the door, but you must enter yourself." And so that's the idea that we're going to be putting forth in TOK. We're going to be putting out the questions, we're going to be discussing these questions, we're going to be helping you attempt to make connections between yourself as a knower, the ways of knowing, and the areas of knowledge. But these connections will only become genuine. They'll only mean something to you if you sort of choose to walk through this door that we're opening. And that's the great thing about TOK. Not every student has a chance to take this class. Most students are just worried about studying for the math exam and, reading through their lit assignment so that they can pass a quiz or a test or write a paper down the road. You guys are lucky. You guys are going to get a chance to think about all this thinking that you're being asked to do in school. So, there's a broad overview of the TOK class and what we hope to do. In the next set of videos, we're going to start talking about knowledge itself. Knowledge is one of those sort of tricky words. Everybody sort of thinks that they know what they mean when they say the word knowledge. There's an interesting sentence that we know what we mean when we talk about knowledge. But it's not really clear sometimes what counts as knowledge and what shouldn't count as knowledge. We're going to open up that conversation in the next set of videos.